The sun hung low over the small industrial town, its orange glow brushing against the cracked pavements and weathered steel buildings. The faint hum of motorcycles in the distance was the only sign of life on that forgotten stretch of road. Outside an abandoned warehouse, a little girl clutched a broken doll, her small fingers trembling, eyes red from crying. Her mother knelt beside her, a dark bruise marring her cheek, her breath shaky and shallow. It was the kind of scene that could break even the hardest heart. Before we dive deeper, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of standing up for what's right, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Every story like this one reminds us that humanity still exists, sometimes in the most unexpected people. That morning had started like any other for Leila and her 5-year-old daughter Maddie. The small factory at the edge of town where Leila worked paid barely enough to cover rent. But she showed up every day because she had no choice. Her husband had left 2 years ago, vanishing without a trace after losing his job and sinking into debt. Since then, life had been nothing but survival, one shift after another, one bill after another, and one prayer after another whispered before sleep. The factory, Red Line Steelworks, was known for its ruthless supervisors, men who treated their workers like disposable machines. But Leila endured it all for Maddie's sake. On that particular day, she had brought her daughter to the factory because the babysitter cancelled last minute. Maddie sat quietly in a corner with her doll, humming to herself, waiting for her mother's shift to end. Everything seemed normal until the supervisor's son, Derek, a cocky 20-something who strutted around like he owned the place, spotted Maddie. He laughed when he saw the little girl clutching her doll, mocking her torn clothes and dirty shoes. When Leila tried to ignore him, Derek grew louder, calling her names, making jokes about her beggar family. Then, to everyone's shock, he snatched the doll from Maddie's hands and ripped its arm clean off, tossing it into a puddle of oil. Maddie's scream echoed through the factory. Leila rushed over, tears welling in her eyes, begging him to stop. But Derek didn't like being told what to do, especially by a woman he looked down upon. He shoved Leila so hard she stumbled against the wall, hitting her face on a metal beam. The room fell silent. No one dared to move. The workers just looked away, too afraid to lose their jobs. Leila didn't fight back. She just pulled her daughter close and whispered, "It's okay, baby, it's okay." But it wasn't. Nothing about it was okay. Maddie kept crying, clutching the broken doll, her little heart breaking at the sight of her mother's bruised face. When they were finally forced out of the factory gates, humiliated and in pain, something changed in the air. That's when the roar of engines broke the silence. From the end of the street, 7 motorcycles appeared, lined up like soldiers of thunder. The sound of their engines rolled through the empty lot, powerful and commanding. The lead rider, a heavily tattooed man with a mohawk and a leather vest bearing the words Hell's Angels RL chapter pulled up right in front of them. His name was Ryder, and he wasn't someone people messed with. He killed the engine and took off his helmet, his eyes falling on the trembling child and her injured mother. "What happened?" he asked, his deep voice calm but dangerous. Maddie sniffled, still clutching her doll. Between sobs, she managed to say, "They broke my toy, and they hit my mom." For a moment, Ryder just knelt down so he could look her in the eyes. There was a quiet stillness between them, the kind of silence before a storm. He gently picked up the broken doll, examining it as if it was something sacred. Then he looked back at his crew, who had dismounted and were standing behind him like a wall of leather and steel. Ryder turned his head toward the factory, his jaw tightened. "Who did this?" Leila tried to stop him, her voice trembling. "Please, sir, don't. It's not worth it. We'll just leave." But Ryder shook his head slowly. "Lady, some things are always worth it." The bikers revved their engines, one by one, until the ground itself seemed to rumble beneath their boots. Maddie watched with wide eyes as they formed a line and rode straight toward the factory gates. Dust and exhaust filled the air, and within seconds, the sound of their engines echoed through the entire complex. Inside, Derek and his buddies were still laughing, not realizing what was coming. When the first biker burst through the factory gate, everyone froze. The workers scattered, watching in awe and fear as the 7 riders parked right in front of the supervisor's office. Ryder stepped off his bike, the broken doll still in his hand. He walked up to Derek, who tried to act tough, but couldn't hide the fear in his eyes. Ryder tossed the doll at his feet. "You like breaking things that can't fight back," he said coldly. Derek stammered, "Who are you?" Ryder leaned in close. "Someone who doesn't tolerate cowards." No one knew what happened in that office after the doors shut, but when Ryder and his men walked out, Derek's face was pale, and his arrogance was gone. The factory owner, who had rushed in upon hearing the commotion, was handed a resignation letter signed by Derek himself, along with a promise from the bikers that if he ever laid a hand on another worker or their family, they'd come back. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the bikers returned to where Lila and Maddie were waiting. Ryder knelt again, holding out the same doll, now fixed with a new arm, cleaned and dressed in a tiny leather vest just like his. "She's tougher now," he said softly. Maddie's eyes lit up as she took the doll, hugging it tightly. Lila tried to thank him, but her voice cracked. "I don't know how to repay you." Ryder smiled faintly. "You already did, by teaching your girl to hold on to what matters, even when the world tries to take it." They offered to help her find safer work, and within a week Leela was working at a biker-owned auto shop, earning better pay and surrounded by people who treated her with respect. The Hells Angels had a rough reputation, but in that town people began to see them differently. Not as outlaws, but as protectors. Maddie started visiting the shop after school, her laughter echoing through the garage as the bikers teased her gently, calling her little angel. She'd often tell the story of how the men on the big bikes saved my mommy and fixed my doll. And every time she did, the toughest biker among them would turn away, pretending to check his tools just to hide the emotion in his eyes. Weeks passed, and the bruise on Lila's face faded, but the memory of that day never did. It became a story whispered around town, a story of justice, kindness, and the strange ways in which fate brings unlikely heroes together. The factory shut down soon after, once the owner's corruption came to light, and the workers found new jobs through the bikers' network. One afternoon, as Maddie played with her doll outside the shop, a woman stopped by, asking if the rumors were true that the Hells Angels had stood up for a little girl and her mom. Ryder simply nodded. "We don't pick fights," he said, "but we don't walk away from one when someone innocent gets hurt." That night, the town gathered at the diner, lighting candles in honor of the kindness that had rippled through their community. Lila stood beside Ryder, tears glistening in her eyes as she whispered, "Thank you for showing my daughter that not all strength comes from fists. Sometimes it comes from heart." Ryder just smiled and looked out at the horizon where the sun melted into gold. "Sometimes," he said, "it takes the broken to protect what's pure," as the engines roared once more. The bikers rode off into the fading light. Maddie waved her tiny hand, her doll clutched tightly against her chest. The same doll that once symbolized pain now stood as a reminder of hope, courage, and redemption. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to help spread more stories that restore faith in humanity. Sometimes the people we least expect are the ones who teach us what compassion truly means. Before you go, tell us in the comments, do you believe in second chances, even for those the world has judged too harshly? Because sometimes the most broken souls carry the biggest hearts and the loudest engines.